Not even in my wildest dreams did I imagine I'd one day be kidnapped for ransom, and the one behind it all was my own daughter-in-law. This isn't the plot of some TV drama. It's a true story, one I've just lived through. I want to share it with you today, so stay with me until the end of this video and tell me where you're listening from. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share to support my channel, because what you're about to hear will make you question who you can truly trust. The first thing I remember is the smell. Gasoline mixed with rust and something wet dripping from the ceiling. The rope burned into my wrists every time I tried to move, and the growling of that dog echoed through the shadows like a warning that I wasn't supposed to make it out alive. The single bulb swinging above me made the whole room breathe light and dark, chasing each other across the cracked walls. I could still hear Dana's voice in my head, smooth and cruel, like she was right beside me. "If you're still alive after 24 hours, I'll come back. Think carefully about that safe of yours." She had said it like a joke, her lipstick-perfect smile hiding the monster underneath. I looked at the broken phone on the ground, its glass spider-webbed and useless. My last link to help was gone. She had taken everything: the house keys, the bank files, even my wedding ring. I wanted to scream, but the sound of the dog pacing near the door reminded me I had to stay still. I tried to breathe slow, counting each inhale the way my late husband used to when he wanted me calm. 1, 2, 3. The smell of gas was thicker now. My heart thudded hard enough that I could hear it in my ears. I thought of the years I let Dana walk all over me, pretending her cruelty was stress, her greed was ambition. Not anymore. Somewhere inside me, fear began to turn into something sharper. I whispered to myself that I wasn't done yet. My hands ached, but I pulled against the rope until the skin on my wrists split. The pain felt like proof that I was still alive. Outside, I heard the sound of her car engine fade into the night. She thought this was the end. She thought the old woman who raised her husband was just another obstacle to erase. I leaned my head back against the cold wall and whispered into the dark, letting every word cut through the fear. "You picked the wrong woman, Dana." People in town used to call me the lady with the quiet diamonds. I never cared for that nickname, but it stuck. For 35 years, I ran Barrett's Jewels, a modest store with glass counters that gleamed every morning when sunlight hit the display case. I was good at what I did. I could tell the difference between a ruby and a spinel by a single glance, and I treated every client like they were family. After my husband passed away, the store became my whole world. I learned to manage the books, file the taxes, and handle every legal paper myself. Maybe that's why no one ever managed to take advantage of me. At least, not until Dana. I live in a small 2-story house on the edge of town, quiet but cozy, with a garden of hydrangeas my late husband planted. The second house I rent out to a young couple, and the income covers my living expenses. My savings rest in a local bank I've trusted since my first paycheck. But the real treasure isn't the money. It's what sits inside the steel safe in my bedroom closet, a collection of jewelry pieces that belonged to my mother and her mother before her. Opals, emeralds, and a sapphire brooch shaped like a teardrop. Every stone tells a story of survival of women who refuse to break. I've always been gentle in manner, but not naive. People mistake kindness for weakness, yet I've built my life on precision, not impulse. I never flaunted my wealth because I learned early that envy grows faster than ivy. I wanted peace, not attention. So I smiled, I listened, and I kept my accounts tidy. But behind every kind nod was a woman who read every line of fine print before signing anything. 3 weeks before Dana came into our lives, I did something that would later save me. My lawyer, Derek, helped me draft a secondary will and establish a revocable trust. Quietly, we moved the ownership of my assets under that trust's protection. I didn't tell anyone, not even my son, because I had seen too many stories of widows losing everything to manipulation. I told Derek, "If anyone ever pressures me about inheritance, that's your signal. Something's wrong." He nodded, took my instructions seriously, and filed everything away. Back then, I thought I was simply being cautious. I had no idea that a woman named Dana Whitaker, with her bright smile and perfect manners, was already planning to make me her next target. Jonathan has always been the kind of son any mother would pray for. Thoughtful, patient, never raising his voice even in disagreement. When his father died, he stepped up without complaint, helping me manage the business accounts and keeping the small jewelry store alive. For years, we shared the same quiet rhythm of life: coffee at 7, ledgers at 8, lunch at home with the old clock ticking between us. He never chased money, never cared for status. That changed the day he met Dana Whitaker. Dana worked at the local bank then, where Jonathan went to update one of our accounts. She was young, confident, and spoke with the kind of authority that made people believe she knew things they didn't. Words like diversify, capital expansion, and market fluidity rolled off her tongue like a song. Jonathan was fascinated. She told him she could help him grow beyond the limitations of a small-town business. I still remember her handshake, firm, polished, and just a bit too cold. When they married 6 months later, I tried to welcome her with an open heart. I gave them the small cottage near the lake as a wedding gift. But Dana wasn't interested in peace or home life. She was always looking for the next big thing. First, it was boutique investments, then crypto assets, then a chain of wellness stores that existed only on paper. Each time she failed, she found new words to cover the cracks. Jonathan would come to me confused, trying to explain her losses like temporary storms. "She just needs time, Mom," he'd say. I didn't argue, though. My instinct screamed that time was the one thing Dana was using against him. Subtly, she began changing the way he saw me. "Your mother doesn't trust you," she'd whisper when she thought I couldn't hear. "She keeps control because she doesn't want you to succeed." Soon, Jonathan stopped consulting me on business matters. He said I was too cautious, too old-fashioned. I'd watch him leave meetings with her shoulders tense, eyes clouded with guilt. Dana smiled at me across the dinner table like someone who had already won. What Jonathan never knew was that Dana's banking past wasn't as harmless as she claimed. She had once worked in the document verification department, the place where signatures and transfer orders were reviewed. That meant she knew every loophole, every internal code the system used. When I later discovered how she handled the family's financial records, it all made sense. The perfect daughter-in-law, the charming wife, she was never after love or family. She was after access. I first learned about Mrs. Lindsay Whitaker through whispers. Dana rarely mentioned her mother, except in passing, as if she were a distant relative rather than the woman who raised her. When she finally invited me to visit, I saw an older woman confined to a hospital bed in her own living room, eyes kind but tired. Lindsay tried to smile when she saw me, but her hands trembled as she reached for a glass of water. "Dana's been helping me manage everything," she said softly. "She takes care of my bills, my medicine, my treatments." Her tone carried gratitude, but beneath it, I heard something else: uncertainty. Weeks later, I began to notice strange things. Dana would disappear for hours, claiming she had to move funds for a medical account she managed for her mother. One night, as she took a call in the kitchen, her voice grew sharp. "No transfer it now. Use the authorization code I sent." Her tone wasn't that of a caregiver, it was a broker's command. I couldn't see her screen, but I caught the name of a cryptocurrency exchange flash on her tablet. When Lindsay's condition worsened, the hospital requested an updated insurance confirmation. That's when the first cracks appeared. The account that was supposed to pay for her care was nearly empty. The nurses mentioned to Jonathan that several wire transfers had been flagged as unusual, but they didn't have proof to confront Dana. Maybe it's just an error, he told me. But errors don't happen 3 times in a row. One morning, while Dana was out of bank, envelope was accidentally delivered to my house, a joint account statement under Lindsay's name with Dana listed as the temporary agent. I froze when I saw the signature. I knew that handwriting. It was similar to the one Dana had used to sign a delivery receipt from my store months ago, but this time it bore Lindsay's name. That was when everything clicked. I quietly reached out to a friend of mine, a retired notary. He confirmed my suspicion the authorization form granting Dana control over her mother's finances was not properly certified. It was a forged temporary power of attorney. In legal terms, that's elder financial abuse, a felony. I remember sitting in my kitchen, hands gripping the paper, realizing I wasn't dealing with greed anymore. This was calculated cruelty. Dana had drained her own mother's savings under the guise of love and duty. From that day on, I started keeping copies of everything: emails, statements, transaction logs. Because if she could betray the woman who gave her life, there was no telling what she might do to the rest of us. When Lindsay showed up at my doorstep that afternoon, she was a shadow of the woman I had met months earlier, thinner, paler, but with a fire in her eyes I hadn't seen before. I guided her inside, helped her sit down, and before I could offer tea, she laid a stack of papers on my kitchen table. "I need you to see this," she said, voice trembling, but steady. Bank statements, printed emails, screenshots, even medical invoices, all neatly organized in a folder, labeled with Dana's handwriting. Line after line, the truth unfolded in front of me. Transfers made during hospital stays, withdrawals disguised as medical expenses, and every signature forged. Lindsay pressed her palm against her forehead as she spoke. She used my illness as her cover. I trusted her because she was my daughter. But she drained everything, every cent I worked for. Her voice cracked, but there was no self-pity, only shame. She took a breath and looked straight at me. "Brianna, she's going to come after you next. As long as you have assets, you're her next target. She needs a new victim to pay her debts." That single sentence burned through me like lightning. All the small doubts, the missing details, the way Dana always asked subtle questions about my will, they suddenly aligned into one terrifying pattern. I felt something inside me shift from fear to clarity. I reached for Lindsay's hand. "You're not alone in this anymore," I said quietly. "We'll make sure she never hurts anyone again." For a moment, we just sat there, two mothers who had both mistaken cruelty for love, both fooled by the same smiling face. The air between us was heavy, but alive with a strange sense of solidarity. Lindsay's eyes filled with tears, yet her tone turned fierce. "I'm done hiding," she whispered. She made me feel weak, but I'm not weak anymore. Then she told me something that made my stomach twist. Months before, Dana had secretly recorded a phone call with a cousin during a financial dispute. The recording had been manipulated, edited, and used as leverage to blackmail the woman into silence. Lindsay had recently found the backup file in her old laptop. She looked at me as she slid a flash drive across the table. "She keeps everything Lindsay said, every scam, every lie. She documents it all. That's how she controls people." I closed my fingers around the flash drive, feeling its small weight, like a loaded weapon. That was the moment I knew the fight wasn't about money anymore. It was about justice for Lindsay, for myself, and for every person Dana had destroyed on her climb to nowhere. We decided to keep everything between us. Telling Jonathan would only cause panic, and worse, it might alert Dana. So in the quiet of my living room one afternoon, Lindsay and I made a pact of silence until we had proof strong enough to end this for good. That same evening, I called Derek Chambers, a lawyer I had known for years through the Business Guild. Derek specialized in estate law and elder financial abuse. He was calm, methodical, the kind of man who spoke softly, but always hit his mark. When I told him what we suspected, he didn't hesitate. "You did the right thing coming to me," he said. "Now let's make sure she never touches your money again." Over the next few days, Derek became our quiet guardian. He helped us draft new wills, moving our major assets into separate revocable trusts that were legally protected from outside interference. The key pieces, jewelry deeds and savings certificates, were moved into a dual-access safety deposit box at the bank. Only Lindsay and I together could open it. Derek also created a power of attorney that could only be activated under medical emergency and required 2 witnesses to validate. "If anyone presents another version," he said firmly, "it's a fake." We built layers of defense. New passwords, transfer alerts for any withdrawal over $1,000. And each night at exactly 8:30, Lindsay and I would call each other a ritual we named the safety call. If one of us didn't answer, the other would alert Derek. It became both a security system and a symbol of trust between 2 women who had learned the hard way how fragile safety could be. Then Derek uncovered something that chilled us both. While reviewing financial data, he noticed a pattern of small, recurring transfers tied to an inactive LLC, a shell company, registered under a fake address in Columbus. The account name on the records was DW Management initials that made my blood run cold. "It's her," Derek said quietly. "She's moving money through dummy accounts." Instead of blocking it immediately, Derek proposed a trap. He set up a controlled honeypot transaction, a small monitored transfer from one of Lindsay's old accounts that appeared vulnerable. If Dana tried to redirect or duplicate it, the tracking software would log her device IP and credentials. "We're going to let her think she's winning," Derek explained. "That's how we catch people like her, by letting them reveal themselves." That night, when I hung up from our safety call, I stared at the small notebook where I had written every new password, every security code, every plan. For the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were fighting back quietly, legally, and together. It was almost 2 weeks of silence before Dana finally reappeared. I remember the sound of her car door closing, soft, deliberate, like someone rehearsing remorse. When I opened the front door, she stood there holding a bouquet of yellow tulips, my favorite, and a small box of lemon pound cake from the bakery I used to love. Her smile was fragile, her voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. "Mom," she said, "I know I hurt you. I've been thinking about everything, and I can't stand the idea of us being enemies. I just want you to see me as a real daughter again." For a moment, I felt something inside me loosen. Maybe it was habit, or the part of me that still believed people could change. She reached for my hand, her fingers cool and hesitant. "You've always been so strong," she said softly. "I don't want to fight anymore. I want peace between us." She even glanced around the house like someone revisiting a memory, complimenting the tulips I had planted, asking about my health. It was a flawless performance, tender, remorseful, and terrifyingly convincing. We sat at the kitchen table, and for a brief second, I almost believed her. I poured tea. She cut the cake, laughing nervously, as if testing the air between us. I told myself to stay calm, to listen, but not trust. My instincts were whispering something was wrong, but guilt is a heavy thing. When she hugged me goodbye, she pressed her cheek against mine and whispered, "Thank you for giving me another chance." I didn't answer. After she left, I noticed my keychain was sitting oddly on the counter. She must have moved it while setting down her purse. I brushed it off at the time, thinking I was just being paranoid. But that night, when Derek called for our routine safety check, I mentioned her visit. His tone sharpened immediately. "Did she touch anything?" he asked. I hesitated, then said, "Yes, the keys." "Don't use your car until I look at it," he said. Days later, after everything that happened, the police would confirm our fears. Hidden under the leather tag of my car keys was a tiny GPS tracker glued with industrial adhesive. The forensic team said the glue type matched those used for covert devices. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act. It was planned. Every flower, every apology, every tear, all calculated. Looking back, I realized that day wasn't reconciliation. It was reconnaissance. Dana hadn't come to make peace. She came to prepare her next strike. Dana always knew exactly which strings to pull. She had studied me like a map, memorizing every weakness, every tender spot in my heart. And the one she aimed for this time was the oldest, softest one of all. My longing to see my family grow again, to hold a grandchild in my arms before I got too old. She showed up one morning looking pale, her makeup lighter than usual, her voice small and fragile. "Mom," she whispered, clutching her stomach as if in pain. "I've been feeling dizzy lately. The doctor says my hormones are unstable. I'm scared. What if I can't give you a grandchild?" Her words hit like a knife wrapped in silk. I stood there speechless, torn between suspicion and instinct. She continued, tears welling up just enough to glisten. "I know I've made mistakes, but Jonathan and we've been trying. I just want to make things right to give this family hope again." She even placed my hand over hers, resting on her stomach as if inviting me to feel something that wasn't there. Her pulse was steady, her breathing calm, every detail rehearsed. I wanted to look away to remind myself of everything she'd done, but the image of a baby, my son's child, flickered before my eyes. I told myself maybe this is her way of changing. Maybe motherhood could soften her. Maybe this was the miracle Jonathan had been praying for. "Dana," I said carefully, "if you're truly serious about starting over, then take care of yourself. I'll help however I can." Even as I spoke, a small voice in me whispered, "Don't believe her. She's spinning something." And she was. Later, Derek would uncover medical purchases linked to Dana's online accounts, shipments of hormonal stimulants, and ovulation boosters prescribed for short-term symptom mimicry. She had stopped taking birth control altogether, forcing her body into chemical chaos to fake pregnancy symptoms. Nausea, fatigue, dizziness, every sign carefully designed to draw pity and erase suspicion. It was dangerous, reckless, and yet brilliant in its cruelty. She didn't just want my forgiveness. She wanted my protection. She knew that the idea of a grandchild would cloud my judgment faster than any lie could. That day when she leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "I just want to make this family whole again," I almost believed her, almost. But now, when I think back to her trembling act and the way she watched my reaction more than she cared about her own tears, I realize it wasn't love that drove her. It was strategy, and I was the target. It was late Friday afternoon when the call came. Dana's voice burst through the speaker, trembling, high-pitched, frantic. "Mom, please help me. My stomach hurts so bad there's blood. So much blood." "Jonathan's not answering. I need you, please." The sound of panic in her voice sent a chill through me. Every instinct as a mother overpowered reason. I didn't think. I just grabbed my car keys and ran. Within minutes, I was on the road, the engine humming, my heart racing faster than the wheels. "Stay calm," I told her over the phone. "I'm coming." "Where are you?" she sobbed, giving me an address I didn't recognize, a small clinic just outside town. Her words stumbled between gasps. They said, "Come quick, please, I can't drive." I could hear traffic in the background, or maybe the sound of a radio. I told myself not to waste a second. When I found her car parked on the shoulder near the exit, she was leaning against it, pale and shaking, clutching her abdomen. "It's bad," she whispered, eyes glassy. "Please, just take me there." I helped her into my passenger seat, fumbling to call emergency services, but she grabbed my phone. "No hospitals," she said. "They already know I'm coming. Just drive." I hesitated, confused, but the sight of blood on her hand shattered my doubt. I pressed the gas and followed her directions. The road narrowed as we left the main highway. Fields turned into stretches of empty lots, power lines sagging overhead. She kept murmuring about needing to call her doctor, pretending to dial pressing buttons that didn't make sense. Something in my chest tightened. "Dana," I said slowly, "this doesn't look like a hospital road." Her fingers tightened around her phone. "It's a shortcut." She snapped, her tone cracking for just a second before she softened again. "Please, I'm scared." Then, without warning, she reached across me, grabbed the steering wheel, and jerked it sharply to the right. The tires screamed against the dirt road as the car swerved into an abandoned path surrounded by trees. My breath caught in my throat. "Dana, what are you doing?" She didn't answer. Her face was cold now, empty, her trembling suddenly gone. That was when I understood. The pain, the blood, the desperation, all of it had been a performance. Somewhere near the old highway, a traffic camera caught the image of my car, turning onto that deserted road, time-stamped clear, undeniable. It would later become the first and only clue Derek and the police had to find where I disappeared that night. The car came to a sudden stop in the middle of nowhere. Dust swirled through the open window, catching in the cold evening light. My heart was still pounding from the abrupt turn when Dana reached into her bag and pulled out something metallic. For a moment, I thought it was her phone. Then I saw the blade flick open, a small, folding knife gleaming like a cruel smile. "Get out!" she said, her voice steady now, no trace of panic left. She tossed a crumpled stack of papers onto my lap. "You're going to sign this right now." I looked down. It was a property power of attorney already filled out with her name typed neatly as the sole beneficiary. The signature line for mine was blank. "What is this?" I asked, though I already knew. She smirked. "Just a formality, Mom. You'll still live comfortably. I just need access to help manage things. You're too emotional about money." Her tone was rehearsed, her words smooth, but her eyes were cold, shark-like. When I didn't move, she leaned closer, pressing the blade against the leather seat beside me. "Sign it," she hissed, "or I'll open that gate." I followed her gaze to a nearby shed where a heavy metal cage stood half open. Inside, a dog growled, its chain rattling. The sound sliced through the silence. "He hasn't eaten since morning," Dana whispered, almost smiling. I could feel my pulse in my throat, but Derek's words echoed in my mind like a warning bell. Never sign anything without a witness or notarization. If they try to rush you, it's because they can't make it legal. I drew a shaky breath and forced myself to stay calm. "Dana," I said slowly, "you typed this wrong." Her eyes narrowed. "What?" This clause, I pointed to the paragraph near the bottom, buying time as my mind raced. "You wrote revocation of living trust instead of revocable living trust. It voids the entire document. You can't file this anywhere, not even with a forged signature." I watched confusion flicker across her face. She hadn't noticed the mistake. For the first time, her confidence cracked. "Just sign it," she shouted, waving the knife toward me, but her hand trembled. I realized then she didn't fully understand what she was doing. She was desperate, reckless, trying to control something already lost. I met her eyes, my voice steady. "You've already crossed the line, Dana, and that paper proves it." Later, when the police examined the document, that small formatting error, one missing word, one mistyped clause, would become the key legal flaw that exposed the forgery. But at that moment, in the dim light of that dirt road, it was simply my lifeline, the detail that kept me from signing my own destruction. Dana's voice dropped to a chilling calm that made the air itself seem to freeze. She flicked the knife shut, slipped it into her coat pocket, and stepped closer, the sound of gravel crunching under her heels. "You have 24 hours," she said flatly. "If by tomorrow you haven't changed your mind, that dog will finish what I started." Her tone wasn't angry. It was businesslike, cold, as if she were negotiating a contract instead of threatening a life. She pointed toward the cage. The dog barked and threw itself against the bars, foam glistening at its mouth. I could smell its breath mixed with gasoline and rust. I kept my eyes on her, not the animal. The fear was there, yes, crawling under my skin, but I refused to let her see it. "Go ahead," I said quietly, my voice steady even as my hands trembled. "You can force a signature, Dana, but you will never have peace of mind." For a brief second, she froze. Something flickered in her eyes, maybe surprise, maybe anger at being seen for what she really was. Then just like that, the mask cracked. "You think this is a game?" she hissed, her voice breaking into rage. She swung her arm, knocking over a metal canister that clattered across the floor. Tools spilled from a shelf, the sound echoing through the empty shed. "You old fool. You think people like me care about peace?" I stayed silent. Sometimes silence is the sharpest weapon. She paced back and forth, muttering to herself, her hands shaking now. Then she stormed out, slammed the door, and twisted the heavy lock from the outside. The sound of the chains sliding into place was final, a steel punctuation mark on her cruelty. Through the crack under the door, I saw her shadow pass by the click of her heels, fading toward the car. The engine roared to life, headlights slicing through the dusty air. She didn't look back once. She thought she had control, that she had erased me. But she hadn't noticed the one thing she couldn't erase, the active GPS tracker still blinking under her car's dashboard. Derek had insisted I keep the system synced to his account just in case. She had disabled my phone, but not her own signal. That mistake would be her undoing. As the sound of her car disappeared into the night, I leaned against the wall and whispered the same words again. Not for her this time, but for myself. "You can take everything, Dana, but you will never have peace." Every night at exactly 9 o'clock, Lindsay and I called each other. We called it our safety call, a small ritual, to let the other know we were still fine, still breathing, still fighting in our own quiet ways. Derek had suggested it when things first started getting dangerous. He said, "Even one missed call can mean everything." I used to smile at that, thinking he was being overly cautious. But that Friday night, I understood what he meant. I had my tea ready, the clock ticked past 9, and I dialed Lindsay's number. The phone rang once, then cut off abruptly. I frowned and tried again. The same thing happened, a sharp click followed by silence. The third time, it didn't even ring. Just one short mechanical tone, and then nothing. I stared at the screen, confused. My signal was strong. This wasn't normal. Maybe it was just poor reception, I told myself. Or maybe Lindsay was out of the house. But then I remembered the message I had sent her earlier that morning. "I'm going with Dana tonight, might be home late." The memory suddenly made my chest tighten. I tried to reassure myself, but unease began creeping in like cold water under a closed door. I called again at 9:15, 9:30, 9:45. Each time the line disconnected faster, as if someone was pressing end call before I could even speak. By the fifth try, my hands were shaking. I looked at the clock again, 10. She never missed our check-in. Never. At 10:12, my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. Just half a ring, barely enough time for me to reach for it, and then it went dark. I froze, staring at the screen. My heart told me it was her. I could feel it as surely as if I'd heard her voice. I tried to call back, but the line was dead. "This number is not available," the automated voice said. I sat there for a long time, the phone still in my hand, the room silent except for the ticking of the clock. Something terrible had happened. I could feel it in my bones, but I didn't know where to start or who to call. All I could do was wait for morning. When dawn came, I took my phone and drove straight to Derek's office. He studied the log and went still. "You said the missed call was at 10:12, he asked. I nodded. He met my eyes. "That's when the GPS signal from your car stopped transmitting." Days later, the police confirmed what I already feared. That missed call, that half-second whisper, came from my own phone from inside the storage shed where Dana had left me. It was my last attempt to reach out before the battery died. My final message to the world, lost in the dark. That night, I didn't even know how close I was to vanishing from the world. I only learned what happened later, after everything was over. After they told me what Lindsay had done, how she had refused to sleep until she found out where I was. Every night at 9 o'clock, Lindsay and I had our safety call. It was Derek's idea, a small ritual to make sure we were both still safe. It sounds simple, almost silly, but for two women who had already seen too much deceit, it gave us peace. Every night without fail, her voice would come through the phone right on time. 9 o'clock check-in, she'd say, her tone half joking, half tender, and I would always answer. Except that Friday, while I was trapped inside that freezing shed, time became meaningless. I didn't know it was already past 9. I didn't know that Lindsay was sitting in her living room waiting, dialing again and again, 5 times, maybe more, only to hear the short, abrupt click before the call cut out. Not the fuzzy hum of weak reception, but something sharper, deliberate. A call being canceled. Later, she told me she had tried to calm herself, telling her heart to stop racing. She remembered the message I had sent that morning. "I'm meeting Dana tonight, might be home late." That one line, meant to sound harmless, became her anchor and her fear. She told herself, maybe I was just busy. Maybe Dana had taken me somewhere without service. But the unease kept growing. It always does when something inside you already knows the truth. By the 5th call, her hands were shaking. The house felt too still. She walked to the window, watching the empty street outside, whispering my name, as if I could somehow hear her. When she tried one last time, all she heard was the flat, soulless tone of a line gone dead. Then came 10:12 p.m. Her phone lit up for half a second, an unknown number, a single unfinished ring, and then silence. It disappeared before she could reach it. She didn't know it then, but that was me. My trembling fingers had somehow managed to press redial before the screen went black. The signal barely lasted a breath before my phone died. Later, the police traced it. They said it came from a location on the edge of town near an abandoned property. That was where they found me, bruised, exhausted, but alive. So now, whenever I look at a clock and see 10:12 glowing in red digits, I remember that half second of sound, the tiny proof that I hadn't given up yet. I didn't know it at the time, locked in that freezing shed with my hands tied, but while I was fighting to stay conscious, Lindsay was fighting her own kind of battle. She told me later how it happened, how confusion turned into fear, and fear into something sharper. After she couldn't reach me, her first instinct was to call Dana. She wanted to believe it was all a misunderstanding, that maybe Dana and I had argued, and I'd turned off my phone. She told me she even tried to sound calm when she called, forcing her voice to stay steady. But Dana didn't pick up. Instead, a message appeared on her screen, a single sentence that felt like a slap. "Mom, don't get involved in my business." That was all. No greeting, no explanation, not even punctuation. Lindsay said she read it 3 times, hoping it was a mistake. But the words didn't change. They were cold, detached, and cruel, The kind of message no daughter should ever send her mother. She tried calling again, but this time the line went straight to voicemail. Moments later, a notification popped up. Location sharing paused, private mode activated. Dana had turned off her tracking system, something she almost never did. Lindsay told me she just sat there staring at that message, her tea growing cold beside her. That was the moment her heart shifted from confusion to dread. "She's hiding something," she whispered to herself. She told me later that the words came out before she could even think. She had always known her daughter could lie when cornered, the small, polished lies that came with a perfect smile. But this was different. This was silence. And silence, when it comes from guilt, screams louder than words ever could. Anger began to mix with grief. How could a mother accept that her own child might be capable of something unthinkable? Lindsay said her body felt heavy, like she was carrying the truth she didn't want to face. But then, through that storm of emotions, she remembered Derek's voice from weeks before. "If either of you loses contact for more than 12 hours, call me immediately. Don't try to handle it alone." It was a simple instruction, but it snapped her back to reason. She looked at the clock. It had been just over 11 hours since she'd last heard my voice. She didn't wait for the 12th. She reached for the phone, her hand steady now, and called Derek. "Derek," she said when he answered, "it's Lindsay. Something's wrong." And that was the moment everything changed, the moment the quiet, frightened mother became the first person to set my rescue in motion. I wasn't there to see it. Of course, I was still trapped in that dark shed, counting every breath and every sound outside. But later, when Lindsay told me what happened, I realized that moment was the true beginning of my rescue. The morning after I disappeared, Lindsay drove straight to Derek's office, clutching her phone and the printout of our call logs. She said her voice was shaking at first, but when she started speaking, the fear turned into clarity. "Something's happened to Brianna," she told him. Derek didn't waste a second. He opened his laptop, logged into the GPS tracking system he'd installed for me months earlier, part of the legal protection plan we'd created together. He had always insisted on that tracker. Not for control, he told me once, smiling. For safety. Because smart women prepare for what others think will never happen. At the time, I had rolled my eyes. Now that small precaution was the thread that would lead them straight to me. The system showed my car leaving downtown at 5:47 p.m. earlier than I'd told Lindsay I would. The route was strange, a brief stop near the old industrial district for 15 minutes, then a sharp detour toward Greenwood Farm. The signal blinked one last time at 6:42 p.m. and then vanished completely. No sign of movement, no data, nothing, Lindsay said. Derek stared at the map for a long moment, his jaw tightening. "That area's been condemned for years," he muttered. "No one goes there unless they want to disappear." He immediately pulled up public records confirming Greenwood Farm had been part of a land seizure case, fenced off and abandoned since 2011. Then came the legal twist that changed everything. Because I was a senior citizen and the situation involved potential elder endangerment, a direct threat to my safety, Derek was able to file an emergency petition. Under that clause, the police were obligated to act within 6 hours, bypassing the usual waiting period for missing person reports. It was a small detail buried in state law, but Derek knew how to use it like a weapon. Within the hour, 2 patrol cars and a detective from the local precinct were dispatched. Lindsay said she watched from the corner of Derek's office, hands clasped as he spoke to the officers in his calm, precise tone. "We don't have time for protocol," he told them. "She's out there, and she's running out of air." At that exact moment, I was barely breathing. My lips cracked from thirst, my wrists burning against the rope. And somewhere, miles away, that legal loophole, that single piece of knowledge Derek carried in his briefcase, had just bought me 6 precious hours, the difference between being found alive or not at all. I didn't know it then, but while I lay half-conscious on the cold floor of that shed, help was already on its way. Derek had wasted no time. The moment he confirmed my GPS signal had vanished near Greenwood Farm, he called the local police chief himself, then reached out to the volunteer K-9 search team, a group trained to find missing persons across rural counties. Within the hour, patrol units and rescue dogs were heading toward the coordinates of my last known location. The first sign of hope came from a man who worked as a groundskeeper on a nearby property. He told officers that around sunset the night before, he'd seen a silver SUV parked near the old barn. "Didn't look like anyone from around here," he said. "There was a woman getting out, tall, blonde, real put together." And then the barking started. Loud, mean barking like someone let a guard dog loose. His statement matched perfectly with the kind of car Dana drove. As the search team advanced, the dogs picked up a scent trail that led straight to the southern side of the Greenwood property. The air there smelled of gasoline and wet soil. Officers noticed something else, 2 faint tire marks curving into the dirt path, still fresh enough to have been made within the last 12 hours. Near the shed door, the K-9 unit's handler spotted scratches in the wood deep and frantic, like an animal had been trying to dig its way in or out. Meanwhile, miles away, Dana was living her performance. She went to a spa that morning, her nails painted pink, her hair wrapped in a towel, smiling at her reflection as though she hadn't just committed a crime. She even posted a story on social media, a photo of her hand holding a cup of green juice captioned, "Morning checkup with my mother-in-law. Baby's healthy." The lie was as smooth as her manicure. Back at Greenwood Farm, the police were already moving faster than she could imagine. The evidence, the SUV citing the fresh tracks, the claw marks, the absence of any registered occupants on the property, was enough to request an emergency search warrant. Derek arrived just as the approval came through. He watched the officers unseal the gates and approach the barn with flashlights and tactical precision. When they forced the lock open, the dogs went wild, barking, pulling toward the back of the building. The air inside was sharp with metal dust and fear. It wouldn't be long before they found me there, bruised, shivering, and whispering the only words I could still form. "You found me." They told me later that Lindsay refused to stay behind, no matter how much the officers insisted. "I'm not sitting this out," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I won't let another mother go through what I did." Her legs were still weak from months of recovery, but she moved with a strength no one could measure, the kind that only comes from guilt, love, and the desperate need to make things right. Derek walked beside her, his briefcase clutched tightly in one hand. Inside were all the documents he might need. My will, the trust papers, a copy of Dana's photo, and the vehicle registration that linked her directly to the silver SUV. Every piece of paper was another brick in the wall closing in on Dana. He wasn't just a lawyer that day. He was part of the rescue team, his calm precision balancing Lindsay's fire. When they arrived at Greenwood Farm, the scene was chaos and silence, all at once, flashing lights, barking dogs, radios crackling, but an eerie emptiness hanging in the air. The officers had already set up a perimeter searching every structure. The K-9 units moved in wide arcs, noses, low tails, stiff. The smell of fuel and rust carried in the wind. Lindsay covered her mouth, whispering my name as if it could travel through the dark. Then came the sound that changed everything, a long, distant howl from one of the search dogs followed by frantic barking. The team froze. Derek lifted his head. "That's a signal," he said quickly. "They've found something." Lindsay followed as the officers sprinted toward the old storage building. Her knees shook, but she didn't stop. "Please let it be her," she kept saying, breathless. As they drew closer, another sound broke through, a faint, rhythmic clinking, almost lost under the noise of the dogs. A metal-on-metal sound, weak and steady, like someone tapping with the last of their strength. Lindsay was the first to realize. "That's not debris," she said, eyes wide. "That's her. She's signaling." The officers didn't hesitate. Two men rushed forward with crowbars, and Derek shouted over the noise. "This qualifies for a forced entry under emergency code. You have authorization." The next moments blurred the clang of metal, the dogs pulling the door, giving way with a sharp crack. Light flooded the darkness, and in that flood of chaos, Lindsay saw me, bruised, shivering, but alive, my wrist still moving against a rusted pipe, tapping the rhythm she had heard. Two mothers who had once been bound by pain were now united by purpose. One had raised the woman who tried to destroy me. The other had survived her. But in that moment, there was no past, no blame, only the shared breath of two women who refused to give up. When they finally reached Greenwood Farm, the air was heavy and strange, a mix of wet earth gasoline and something metallic that clung to the nose. The land stretched wide and wild, swallowed by tall weeds that swayed like they were hiding secrets. Derek stepped out of the car, first his shoes sinking into the soft mud. Behind him, officers from the sheriff's department followed with flashlights and cameras, while the rescue team kept their canine dogs close, ready for anything. From where I sat, later describing it, I could almost see what they saw. The barn stood crooked against the gray sky, its wooden door hanging off one hinge, its paint long since peeled away. To most people, it would look abandoned, but Derek noticed immediately that it wasn't. The grass near the entrance was flattened, the dirt disturbed, and faint tire marks curved toward the back. Someone had been there. Recently. Then they saw the dog. A large brown shepherd mix chained to a post near the door, ribs visible, muzzle trembling as it whimpered. Its eyes darted from one face to another, half starved, half terrified. The chain was new, shiny metal links against the rusted post-proof that someone had tied it there not long ago. Derek crouched low, his voice calm but firm. "This animal wasn't abandoned," he said. "It was used." Inside, the concrete floor told the rest of the story. Faint footprints, small, narrow, unmistakably feminine, crossed paths with deeper, heavier ones. Near the wall was a long drag mark, like something or someone had been pulled across the ground. At the edge of that streak, they found a faint trace of blood dried into a reddish smear against the gray cement. "Collect everything," Derek ordered. The officers began sealing off the area, photographing each detail. He knew exactly what to look for. The blood, the shoe print, the animal hair, all of it mattered. Under U.S. law, those samples could confirm not only the act of confinement, but a charge of elder abuse, the deliberate endangerment of an elderly person's life. He watched as a technician carefully placed the dog's shed fur into a sterile evidence bag, then turned to the officer in charge. "Make sure this is logged under criminal abuse," Derek said. "She wasn't just left here. She was imprisoned." When I woke up, the air was thick and metallic, scraping my throat every time I tried to breathe. My wrists burned from the rope that had been pulled too tight. The skin was raw, sticky with dried blood. My tongue felt like sandpaper. For a moment, I couldn't even remember where I was. Then the smell hit me, gasoline dust and fear. The shed. I was still inside. My head throbbed as I tried to sit up. The world tilted, but I forced myself to look around. The light from a crack in the roof barely reached the floor, but something glinted faintly near the corner. A small shard of metal, probably from a broken hinge. I crawled toward it, every movement scraping my knees against the concrete. When I picked it up, it was dull and jagged, no bigger than a thumbnail, but sharp enough to cut through something if I could hold on long enough. I began sawing at the rope, inch by inch. The fibers bit into my skin, but I didn't stop. I remembered my years at the jewelry store, long hours, polishing silver chains, steadying my hands so I wouldn't scratch the stones. Precision, patience, breath control. Those same instincts came back now, guiding me. I inhaled slowly, cut carefully, exhaled, and kept going. My wrists stung warm blood trickling down to my palms, but the strands were loosening. When the last knot finally snapped, I nearly fell forward from exhaustion. My hands were free but shaking. I rubbed feeling back into them, trying not to cry from the pain. Crying would waste water I didn't have. I looked around for anything useful, the broken bucket, the rusted pipe, even the loose sheet of metal by the wall. That was when I heard it barking, distant but real, a dog. My heart jumped. If someone was close enough for the dog to hear me, then maybe I could make them hear me too. I grabbed the piece of metal and started hitting the wall. Once, twice again. The sound was loud, echoing through the hollow space. Clang, clang, clang. I tried to form a rhythm like the SOS pattern I remembered from an old TV show. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. The sound hurt my ears, but I kept going. Somewhere outside, the barking grew louder. My arms trembled. My vision blurred. The world began to spin again. And that's when I heard my mother's voice, not in reality, but deep inside my mind. If you're still breathing, you're still fighting. She used to say that whenever life got cruel, when bills piled up, when my husband passed, when I thought I couldn't go on. I closed my eyes and whispered it back to her, to myself. I'm still breathing. I'm still fighting. That thought, that stubborn, fragile truth, kept me conscious until I heard the first real sound of hope, the distant rumble of an engine, and the sharp, short bark of a rescue dog answering my call. When they opened the shed door, the light felt almost violent, too bright after so much darkness. I remember the cold air hitting my face, the sudden rush of voices, the dogs barking. Someone shouting, "We've got her! She's alive!" Hands reached for me, lifting me gently, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders. The world blurred in flashes of movement, uniforms, flashlights, the red glow of an ambulance. But through it all, one face came into focus. It was Lindsay. She stumbled toward me, her face streaked with tears and mud, her breathing uneven. "Oh, God," she cried, falling to her knees beside the stretcher. "I let her do this. I let my daughter become this." Her words trembled not just from guilt, but from the kind of heartbreak only a mother can feel, the horror of realizing her own child had caused such pain. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, gripping the blanket, like it was the only thing keeping her upright. I reached for her hand, frail, shaking, but warm. "Lindsay," I said softly, "you didn't make her do this. No one chooses their children. But we can choose how the story ends." Her eyes widened, filling again with tears, and she nodded slowly. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something close to peace. For both of us. Around us, the scene was chaos. Rescue workers, documenting everything, cameras on their helmets still rolling. One of the paramedics called out coordinates, another radioed the station for immediate medical clearance. No one noticed the small red light still blinking on one of the rescuers' body cams, recording every word, every trembling breath. That footage, I learned later, became the spark that lit a fire far beyond that farm. The video showed everything: the rusted chains, the blood on the floor, the half-starved dog, and the moment 2 women, one, the mother of the victim, the other, the mother of the perpetrator, held each other in silence. When the clip was released to the public, it spread like wildfire. News anchors called it the story that broke America's heart. People saw more than a crime. They saw a mirror of families torn apart by greed, of mothers carrying guilt that wasn't theirs, of resilience that refuses to die. Public pressure grew so intense that the district attorney opened an emergency hearing within 48 hours. Dana couldn't hide behind charm or excuses anymore. The world had already seen the truth. As they placed me into the ambulance, I turned to see Lindsay one more time. She was standing there, shivering in the wind, her hands clasped together. I managed a faint smile. "We're both still breathing," I told her. "That means we're still fighting." When they took me to the hospital, I thought the nightmare was finally over. But for Derek, it was just beginning. While I lay under a blanket of IV lines and monitors, he was already preparing the counterattack, not with anger, but with precision. That was the thing about Derek Chambers. He didn't shout, he strategized. By dawn, he had called both the bank and the notary office where Dana had once worked. He knew her habits, her arrogance, her belief that the system would always work in her favor because she understood its loopholes. Derek didn't bother accusing her outright. Instead, he requested access to every document she had touched in the last 72 hours. Within the hour the discovery came, Dana had filed an emergency power of attorney at the courthouse the very same day I vanished. The document bore my forged signature, authorizing her full control over my assets. To most eyes, it looked flawless. But Derek saw what others wouldn't: a notary code that didn't match the registry, a signature sequence too smooth to be real, and a submission timestamp exactly 37 minutes after my phone's last GPS ping. It was calculated, not coincidental. She'd planned to claim everything before the world realized I was missing. Instead of confronting her, Derek laid a trap. He sent a discreet order to the bank, a hold fraudulent claim, which froze every account linked to my estate under verification of ownership. On the system's front end, however, the accounts still appeared active. Dana would think she'd succeeded. It was the perfect illusion. Then came his masterstroke. Derek reached out to his cybersecurity contact, a former FBI technician, to trace every login attempt from Dana's digital credentials. Using the same banking infrastructure she once had access to, they created a digital honeypot, a mirrored database that would capture every move she made, down to her IP address, device ID, and biometric login trail. That night, while she sipped wine somewhere celebrating her imagined victory, the system quietly recorded her logging in from her home Wi-Fi. Every click, every file she opened, every transfer she attempted, all of it was archived as real-time evidence. Her fingerprints weren't just on paper now. They were in the code itself. Derek arrived at the hospital later that night, exhausted but composed. "She took the bait," he told me, adjusting his glasses. "We've got her. This time she'll bury herself legally." When the car appeared at the end of the dirt road, Derek already knew it was her. He had been standing by the barn door with 2 officers for nearly an hour waiting. The afternoon light cut through the fog, glinting off the silver SUV as it rolled closer. Dana Whitaker, confident, composed, certain she was walking into a scene of death and silence. Inside I sat, wrapped in a wool blanket, the faint scent of disinfectant still clinging to my skin from the paramedics' care. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear anymore, but from focus. I wanted to see her face the exact second when she realized her plan had failed. The car stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of gravel crunching beneath her boots as she stepped out. I could almost imagine what was running through her mind, how she thought I'd be lifeless by now, how she'd drag my body to the edge of the property, press my cold hand against the safe's biometric scanner, and claim everything she thought she deserved. She pushed the door open. The hinges groaned, letting in a slice of daylight, and there I was. Sitting upright on a wooden chair, blanket across my shoulders, my pulse steady. Derek stood beside me, calm as ever, while 2 armed officers flanked the doorway. For a full second, Dana didn't move. Her brain simply couldn't process what she was seeing. Then the keys slipped from her hand and hit the floor with a sharp metallic clang. "No," she whispered, backing up a step. "No, this isn't—" Her voice broke before she could finish. The color drained from her face. Her eyes darted from me to Derek, to the officers calculating, searching for an escape. Then instinct took over. She turned, stumbling toward the SUV, fumbling for the door handle. "Don't bother," Derek said, his voice firm, echoing across the field. "The GPS tracker is active. Your vehicle's been electronically locked since 7 a.m. Dana froze, her fingers still wrapped around the useless handle. I watched her shoulders tense, her breath hitch. For a moment, I almost saw the child she once was, frightened, desperate, trying to outsmart a world that no longer believed her lies. Then the mask cracked. She spun around, eyes wild, shouting nonsense excuses, half-truths, the reflexive panic of someone realizing the game was over. The officers stepped forward, hands on their holsters. Derek didn't need to raise his voice. "Dana Whitaker," he said clearly, "you are under investigation for elder financial abuse, attempted fraud, and unlawful imprisonment." Her knees buckled. I didn't say a word. I simply met her eyes and held her gaze. Calm, steady, alive. That silence, the one thing she never expected from me, was the loudest answer she would ever get. Dana froze mid-step, one foot still lifted from the ground, her breath catching, as a familiar voice cut through the tense air. It was calm, deliberate, but it carried the weight of every sleepless night, every silent heartbreak. "Don't take another step, Dana." Out from behind the patrol car, leaning on a wooden cane, came Lindsay Whitaker, her mother. Her face was pale, but her eyes were sharp, colder than I had ever seen them. The wind caught the edge of her gray coat, making it flutter like a banner of judgment. For a long moment, the two just stared at each other, mother and daughter, predator and witness, bound by blood, but divided by conscience. Dana's lips parted, trembling. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Her voice was small, the same frightened tone a child might use when caught stealing. But the woman facing her was not the mother who once made excuses for her. Lindsay's gaze didn't soften. "You didn't just betray your husband's mother," Lindsay said slowly, her voice steady but heavy with pain. "You betrayed the woman who gave you life." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Dana's shoulders fell. Her entire body seemed to shrink. I didn't mean," she began, but her sentence broke under the weight of her own guilt. Her eyes darted from her mother to me, to the officers standing nearby, searching for sympathy that no longer existed. I sat quietly, watching them, two women bound by tragedy, each paying the price for love, twisted into something unrecognizable. Lindsay took a step forward, her cane pressing into the dirt, her breath shallow but unwavering. "I raised you better than this," she said. "I taught you to work, not to steal, to fight, not to destroy." Dana shook her head wildly. "You don't understand. I just needed time. I was trying to fix everything. By caging another woman, by faking signatures, by nearly killing her." Lindsay's voice cracked, finally showing the anguish underneath the control. "I watched your lies destroy everything decent in you, and I kept silent. But silence ends today." The entire clearing seemed to still. Even the wind held its breath. The two mothers, one betrayed by her child, the other nearly killed by that same child, now stood side by side. Their pain was different, but their strength was the same. I met Lindsay's eyes and gave a faint nod. We didn't need words. We both understood what it meant to love someone who had lost their humanity and to finally let them face the cost. In that moment, the story no longer belonged to Dana. It belonged to the two of us. Two women who refused to be victims any longer. When Derek set the files on the table, I felt the air in the room change like a temperature drop that signaled the truth was about to be exposed. He methodically opened the folder and slid each paper toward the officers, his movements deliberate, precise, as if he were arranging chess pieces. The first document was the so-called power of attorney, the emergency form that had been filed the day I disappeared, and even to my untrained eye, something looked off. But Derek pointed out the specifics. I could not have noticed the wrong phrasing in the legal paragraph, the mismatched notary code, the signature loop that repeated a mechanical flourish that did not belong to my hand. He explained how a document like that is supposed to carry a chain of custody and authentication, and how hers did not. Then he laid out the bank records, a ledger of timestamps and login attempts, and showed the entry that stunned the room, a login traced directly to the internet address on record for Dana Whitaker's home. He tapped the line and said that the IP matched not by coincidence, but by digital fingerprint, the same route her devices used to access accounts when she worked at the bank. The officers leaned in their faces, tightening. Derek did not stop there. He played a recording, the audio thin at first, but then clear, and I heard the sound of Dana's voice in my own ears, threatening me in a way that felt like being struck. In that tape, she said plainly that if I did not sign, she promised the dog would end my life. Hearing the words carried a different cruelty than the memory of what had been done in person, because it showed intent in cold, recorded proof, and the room seemed to hold its breath. He placed a printed transcript beside the audio file and let the silence fill in the rest. Then, as if layering evidence like a building being constructed, he produced screenshots of extortionate text messages demanding signatures and cooperation, and photographs from a traffic camera that caught Dana's SUV turning off the main road toward Greenwood Farm at precise times that matched the GPS ping from my car. Derek pointed from one piece of evidence to another, connecting the dots aloud, the bank entry to the login to the email she sent to the bank, attempting to certify the emergency authority, sent 12 minutes before she returned to the shed, the camera image to the updated GPS coordinates showing the car stopped, and then the final loss of signal. He explained that the email sent before she returned meant she was acting with premeditation, trying to validate the forged claim before anyone discovered I was missing, and that this transformed her from a person who might claim a sudden lapse into a person actively engaged in fraud. I watched Dana's face pale and collapsing, and I felt a strange calm. The evidence was not only factual, it was damning, and the way Derek unfolded it left no room for narrative twists. He finished by asking the officers to note everything in the report to prepare the affidavit, because in that stack of papers and recordings lay the legal scaffolding that would hold the prosecution, and I, who had been silenced and bound, could finally listen as the truth spoke for me. I walked toward her slowly, my steps steady despite the cold concrete floor beneath me. Dana stood cornered near the broken door, her mascara streaking down pale cheeks, eyes darting like a trapped animal. The officers had already read her rights, but she didn't hear a thing. Her gaze was fixed on me as if I were the one holding judgment. When I stopped just a few feet away, she flinched. For a moment, I simply looked at her, not with anger, but with something far heavier recognition. I had seen this version of her before years ago when she first stole from her mother and cried the same tears. Back then, I had chosen to believe that remorse could heal corruption. I was wrong. I forgave you once, I said quietly, my voice low but clear. When you lied to your own mother. I told myself everyone deserves a chance to start over. But you didn't start over, Dana. You started digging deeper. She shook her head violently, tears spilling. I just wanted to pay my debts, she sobbed. I wasn't trying to kill anyone, I swear. I just wanted to fix things. Her words bounced off the cold walls, hollow and thin. I took another step forward, close enough that she could see the bruises still marking my wrists, the proof of her intentions. You can fix a mistake, I said. You can't fix a soul that sold itself. Dana covered her face, shoulders trembling. Please don't hate me, she whispered. Hate! I let the word linger, almost tasting its bitterness. Then I shook my head. No, Dana. Hate would mean I still expect something from you. What I feel now is simpler pity. She looked up desperate, searching for mercy in a place where mercy no longer lived. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she said again, as if repetition could undo the past. My tone sharpened, though I never raised my voice. No one becomes poor from money, Dana. People only become poor from conscience. The words fell heavy in the silence, echoing against the tin walls. Even the officers seemed to pause as if something sacred had been spoken aloud. Outside, the dog began barking, deep, guttural, impatient. Its chain rattled against the metal gate, the sound reverberating through the air like a growl from fate itself. Dana turned her head toward the noise, trembling. To me, it was more than sound, it was reflection. The beast she had used to terrorize others now mirrored the darkness she carried inside. I stepped back, letting the officers move in. The cuffs clicked shut around her wrists, a cold punctuation to a story she had written herself. As they led her out, I stood still, the echo of the barking fading into the wind. For the first time, I felt nothing, not fear, not anger, only the weightless certainty that justice, both human and divine, had finally arrived. The moment the officers stepped forward, the air seemed to freeze. Their boots echoed against the concrete floor, heavy and deliberate. One of them spoke firmly, his voice clear enough for everyone to hear. Dana Whitaker, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Dana's breath came in short bursts. Her hands trembled violently as they were pulled forward and locked in cold steel. The click of the handcuffs cut through the silence, sharp, final, undeniable. I stood a few feet away, watching her shoulders collapse under the weight of reality. Her hair, once so carefully styled for her videos, now hung limp and tangled. There were no filters, no ring lights, no audience left to applaud her performance. Only two mothers and the law she thought she could outsmart. Lindsay stood beside me, her hand gripping her cane so tightly, her knuckles turned white. We didn't say a word. There was nothing left to add. The truth had spoken for itself. Outside, the animal control team arrived. The same dog she had used to terrify me was now led out by a handler, its ribs still visible, its eyes wide and confused. As the leash tightened and the dog was guided into a transport van, the symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The creature that once embodied her cruelty had become living evidence of her crimes. The perfect daughter-in-law, the flawless influencer, the woman of fake kindness, all of it crumbled in that instant. Dana turned her head as the officers guided her out, tears streaking down her face. But they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of loss. Loss of control, of image, of the illusion she had built so carefully. The flashing red and blue lights from the patrol car washed over her features, painting her in alternating shades of fear and emptiness. It was as if karma itself had taken physical form, moving, breathing, and surrounding her. I stood there silent as the car door closed with a heavy thud. The engine started, and the vehicle rolled forward slowly, its reflection gliding across the puddles of rain and oil. The siren didn't blare. It didn't have to. The light alone carried enough judgment. A few feet away, Derek's phone rang. He stepped aside to answer, his expression tightening as he listened. When he returned, his tone was calm but resolute. "The district attorney just called," he said. "They're upgrading the charges, kidnapping, attempted manslaughter, and financial fraud. The evidence you and Lindsay provided made it airtight." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then I exhaled, the sound shaky but free. Justice didn't roar. It simply arrived, steady, quiet, undeniable. The courthouse in Franklin County was packed that morning. Reporters, legal clerks, curious townspeople, all drawn by the spectacle that once would have been unimaginable. Dana Whitaker, the woman who had paraded her perfect life online, now standing in an orange jumpsuit before the judge. The seal of the state of Ohio hung behind the bench, gleaming under the fluorescent light as the clerk read out the charges one by one. Count 1, he began kidnapping with intent to extort. Count 2, elder abuse. Count 3, forgery of legal documents. Each word landed like a hammer. Dana stood stiffly beside her defense attorney, her wrists shackled, her face pale. The confident smile that had once charmed investors and followers alike was gone, replaced by a tremor that betrayed everything she'd tried to hide. Derek Chambers sat at the prosecution's table, calm but relentless. He presented each piece of evidence the same way he always did, logically, methodically, leaving no room for sympathy. The GPS logs, the voice recording where Dana threatened me with the dog, the text messages demanding access to my safe, the forged power of attorney with its mismatched notary code. It was not a story, it was a map of guilt drawn line by line. The jury listened in silence, their faces unreadable. When Derek played the audio of Dana's voice, the one where she said, "If you don't sign, this dog will end you," a murmur rippled through the courtroom. Even the defense lawyer lowered his gaze. After the closing statements, the judge called for recess. The jury withdrew. I sat there beside Lindsay, our hands loosely clasped, both of us quiet. We didn't pray for punishment. We prayed for clarity, for closure. 45 minutes later, the jury returned. The four persons stood and spoke clearly. "We find the defendant guilty on all counts." Dana swayed slightly as the words hit her. Her attorney tried to steady her, but she pulled away, her lips moving soundlessly, maybe still trying to rewrite her own story. The judge's tone was measured but cold when he read the sentence: 15 years in state prison, without parole eligibility for the first 10. Flashes erupted as cameras clicked in a frenzy. Dana was led out her steps, dragging mascara-smudged tears streaking across a face that once sold perfection to strangers. Outside, the media shouted questions, but she said nothing. For the first time, her silence was not manipulation, it was defeat. Then came the final twist. The prosecutor stepped forward and addressed the court. New financial records confirm the defendant used her own mother's bank account for laundering stolen funds. Due to this aggravating factor, sentencing will include an additional restitution order. The words struck like divine punctuation, karma, written in legal ink. Dana had stolen from the woman who gave her life, and now even the law mirrored that betrayal. As she disappeared behind the courthouse doors, I felt no triumph, only quiet balance. Justice had arrived, not with vengeance, but with truth. After the trial ended, I thought I had seen the last of courtroom tears. But the letter came 3 days later, a thick white envelope in my mailbox, my name written in Jonathan's handwriting, shaky and uneven. I stood there for a long moment before I dared to open it. Inside was a folded piece of paper that smelled faintly of ink and regret. "Mom," it began. "I saw every sign. I heard the hesitation in your voice, the way you avoided my eyes. I knew something was wrong, but I chose silence. That silence cost me my mother and myself." I had to sit down to keep reading. The words bled honesty in a way my son hadn't spoken in years. He confessed everything, how he ignored his instincts, how pride and fear blinded him, how his silence was the coward's comfort. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He only wrote, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I only hope to do what's right, even if I'm late." When I finished, I folded the letter carefully, my hands trembling. For the first time since the kidnapping, I cried not from anger, but from something softer, almost human again. A week later, Derek told me Jonathan had left his job. He'd sold his car, given up his apartment, and joined a volunteer program at the Legal Aid Center Derek supported, the one that helps elderly victims of financial abuse. He said he wants to make himself useful, Derek told me. I didn't respond right away. The idea of my son helping others like me felt both painful and poetic. From time to time, Derek would mention that Jonathan was learning fast. He sat with clients, filled out forms, even accompanied older women to the bank to ensure they weren't coerced into signing away their money. He listens, Derek said once, like someone who's finally hearing what silence really costs. Then one evening, I turned on the television and saw him, my son, sitting in front of a camera under studio lights. His hair was shorter, his eyes tired but clear. The reporter asked why he agreed to speak publicly. Jonathan took a breath, his voice calm yet heavy. "Because love isn't supposed to blind you," he said. "When you stay silent in the face of evil, you become part of it. Don't let love make you blind to cruelty." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I had expected guilt, maybe shame, but not this quiet courage. He had found his voice, the one he had lost in fear. I didn't call him that night. I just sat there in my living room, staring at the television as the credits rolled. My hand found its way to my chest, right above my heart, where pain had once lived. "You finally found your way back," I whispered. And in that whisper, I realized forgiveness wasn't something spoken. It was something felt, when love at last turned into truth. After the trial, I wanted to close the chapter quietly. But Derek insisted there was still one more thing I needed to do, not for revenge, but for protection. "You've already fought the battle," he told me. "Now let's make sure no one can ever open that door again." So for weeks, we sat in his office, surrounded by files, deeds, and folders that smelled faintly of paper and old ink. Derek helped me rebuild everything from the ground up: my accounts, my property titles, even my life insurance and savings. Every asset I owned was consolidated under a single entity, the Brianna Barrett Trust. It was a legal fortress, immune to manipulation, managed through a dual authorization system that would require both my signature and a trustee's oversight for any transfer. For the first time in years, my wealth and my peace belonged fully to me again. But I didn't stop there. The more I thought about what happened, the more I realized how many women like me had no one to call, no Derek to protect them. I told him I wanted to create something lasting, not just safety for myself, but a lifeline for others. Derek smiled in that quiet, knowing way of his. "Then let's build it right." Together, we established the Second Bloom Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to helping elderly women who had been financially exploited by family members. 25% of my assets went into the fund, a sum large enough to provide legal counseling, emergency housing, and financial literacy workshops. We partnered with the Elder Justice Initiative, ensuring that no woman who had been betrayed by her own blood would ever stand alone again. Derek also advised me to file for an Elder Financial Protection Order, a legal safeguard that would alert both law enforcement and the courts if anyone ever attempted to access my accounts or falsify my records. "Think of it as a silent alarm," he said. "It ensures that next time response comes before harm." I nodded. It was strange feeling secure, not through walls or locks, but through law and foresight. Months later, during the signing ceremony of the foundation, I was asked to give a short speech. I don't enjoy microphones or crowds, but I stood before them, journalists, attorneys, survivors, and felt something shift. My voice was calm, steady, and this time it wasn't trembling from fear. "No one," I said, looking into the cameras, "can steal our true worth unless we allow them to." The room went still. Then applause, long and warm. That one sentence made its way across newspapers and television screens the next day. Reporters called it a message of dignity reborn. As I left the event, I looked up at the blue sky over Franklin County and smiled quietly. For the first time, I wasn't surviving, I was rebuilding. After the sentencing, the world slowly went quiet again. The reporters stopped calling, the cameras disappeared, and what was left was silence, the kind that feels like healing rather than emptiness. A month later, Lindsay Whitaker sold her old apartment in Columbus and moved into a small cottage just 2 streets away from my home. We never planned it formally, but it felt right, 2 women who had survived the same storm finding warmth in each other's company. Behind my house, there was a wide patch of soil that had once been neglected, choked with weeds and old roots. One afternoon, Lindsay and I decided to clear it out. We planted tulips, rows and rows of them in every color we could find: white for truth, yellow for courage, and red for forgiveness. We named it the Garden of Truth. Each tulip, Lindsay said, pressing her hands into the earth, is a woman who chose to stand again after being betrayed. I nodded. Together, we worked in quiet rhythm, planting, watering, tending. The soil was soft beneath our fingers, the air filled with the scent of renewal. It became more than a garden. It was a testimony carved in petals. Every morning, we met there with a pot of tea. We'd sit on the wooden bench under the old maple tree, sipping slowly, sometimes laughing at memories that once hurt too much to speak of. "We've earned these wrinkles," Lindsay liked to joke. And I would answer, "They're just battle medals in disguise." The days grew slower, kinder, filled with the kind of peace that only comes after truth has been told. One morning, a letter arrived. It was handwritten in neat cursive from a 72-year-old woman in Minnesota. She had seen our story on television, contacted the Second Bloom Foundation, and received help to escape her abusive son. She wrote, "Because of you, I found the strength to say no. Your garden saved more than flowers, it saved me." Lindsay and I read it together, eyes wet, hearts full. For the first time, we realized the Garden of Truth had bloomed far beyond our backyard.